Welcome back to the Expanded Minds podcast. Today, I have a special guest with me, and his name is Josh Roberts.
Yeah, what's up, Ezekiel?
What's up? Josh received his bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of South Africa and his master's in theology from Fuller Seminary in Pasadena. And shout out to Pasadena right there. One thing we can also give Josh a degree in is his experience and knowledge on how to unite his inner world as well as his outer world, in which he learned by swimming through the treacherous waters of mental health. And we'll say that he has his master's in the hero's journey. Shout out to Joseph Campbell. Josh currently is a peer support specialist with NAMI in San Diego, as well as interface to help people through and with their mental health. Josh is also the founder of Inspired Mind Mental Health, in which he provides a neurodiversity gifts workshop in collaboration with NAMI. He provides videos and written mental health material, online programs, and provides his peer support specialist services. The reason why I have Josh here with me today is because of his passion and deep insight on the synergy between mental health and the mystical. So Josh, that was my warm, long welcome. And I have an opening question for you. And it's going to be, tell me about your journey with mental health and how you have learned to swim through the treacherous waters of mental health. And that is an analogy to the quote from Joseph Campbell: the psychotic drowns in the same waters in which the mystic swims with delight. So go ahead and take the floor.
That's one of my favorite quotes of all time, man. Yeah, you've made the water nice and warm for me, Ezekiel. Thanks for that warm introduction, man. I do feel like I'm in Africa.
not by peeing in the pool, in the water though. I've made it warm by my presence.
Your presence, yeah, man. And there's definitely clear boundaries. There's the screen. So what you do on your side of the screen is up to you, man. But I'm feeling the radiance and I appreciate that, bro. And I like how you say, I got a degree in lived experience of integrating the inner and the outer world. I think that's the best education you can get, is experience and actually having to navigate that line. So you asked about my story and how I've learned how to swim. Well, how do you first learn to swim? I mean, I don't know. They had a technique back in the day where they just throw the babies in the deep end and let them try to figure it out themselves. Maybe it's not the most humane way, but I guess I got thrown in the deep end. And that happened with drugs. It was marijuana, weed, that triggered my first so-called psychosis. But I mean, I'd been smoking since I was 16 before that. And in the beginning, it was just the usual stuff. Like, whoa, bro, we got the munchies and we just like get the giggles and stuff. But my friends kept on going down that path, whereas I was really interested about how this was affecting my consciousness. And I was trying to watch it from an observer's perspective. So I first got like kind of psychological, what is it making me think? And then I got societal, like, wait, what is everyone doing? What are the games that everyone's playing? And then when I got spiritual is really when I got thrown into the water. And that was 6 years later. So I was 22, living in San Francisco. And I smoked weed, as I had many times before with my brother, went into the bathroom and I prayed for the Holy Spirit in the mirror. I was like, oh, I wonder if I can access more of the spiritual realm on the substance. And as I did, I felt like fire descended and the room went dark. And I don't know if the light bulb went out. It might have actually gone out. Boom. And when I came out of the bathroom, I walked into a different world. I had this big paradigm shift, and this dog came up to me, and I believed I could telepathically communicate with this dog. And it kind of started becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. Once I believed that, then suddenly all this communication was happening at me, and I was just bombarded by messages from everything, particularly this dog. I could look deep into my brother's eyes and see into his soul. I knew when my phone was going to ring and who was calling. I had access to the mystical psychic domain, but it got a little scary, man, because about a year later, the same thing happened, but this time I was getting darker downloads from this domain. And maybe we don't really talk about that as much in the West. I know it's all about like light and love and stuff, but there was something that had a malevolence to it, and it was tricky too. And so I ended up taking a big break from weed, going to seminary, studying psychology, because it's like, what on earth is the mind? How infinitely deep does it go? And studying theology, because it's like I knew that there was a fusion between mind and spirit, and I wanted to explore that intersection. So it was ironically in seminary up in Pasadena, with Pasadena, it is a very special town, that I believed I was being led by God to smoke weed again. And whereas the first time the experience wore off in about an hour, and then I came back to reality, like, what was that? This time when I smoked, I fell down Alice's rabbit hole for a month and a half, and I was stuck down there despite not touching weed again. And it really was, as you described, the blurring of the line between the inner and the outer world. And I was drowning in the water, swallowing big old chunks of it. I thought I was doing synchronized swimming, man, but the police didn't think so. And they arrested me because they thought that I was on LSD, which led to, I thought I was the version of Jonah stuck in the belly of the jail for 3 days. But there really was, it wasn't all just happening in my mind too. There was a lot of objective evidence that I was onto stuff. Like my brother said, that I was reading his mind verbatim, word for word. And I told one of my best friends something that happened to him when he was a little kid that he'd never told me before in a lot of detail. So it's like I was onto something. And so that was confusing. It's like I thought I discovered truth, but yet it was causing all this havoc in my life. And so the way that I learned to navigate that was by stepping back from the substance, like stepping back from the weed. It's like, if you're drinking the Kool-Aid, you're not going to be able to tell where the Kool-Aid ends and where the actual world begins. It's kind of like if you get drunk, you can't tell that you're like, yeah, I can drive, no worries. I got this. Yeah, but the instrument that's making the decision that you got that is the same thing that's inebriated. So I needed to step back from that whole paradigm. And that's when the clarity kicked in. And I, based on all my research, like I researched it a ton after that. This is a real dimension. And ironically enough, like I believe a lot of the people in so-called psychosis are tapping into the mystical domain, but normally they're misnavigating it, as I was as well. But by deepening my understanding of this terrain, by reading the Christian mystics, by exploring other world religions, by connecting to wise community elders and members, I've learned to piece together a map. And so next time that I believe that I'm Jesus, oh, I know how Jesus himself handled that in humility and submission instead of taking all the glory. That's an example of how the spiritual masters and the geniuses of all time have had to navigate these states of neurodiversity. And so it's an unfolding map, and it's built through people like you, man, and community, and everyone is a little piece of the puzzle. And so getting together, we're able to assemble this big tapestry that's emerging. And that's showing that our world is so enchanted and magical and exciting and full of meaning and purpose, which I think is one of the main reasons that people get deeply depressed. And I did in my clinical depression. I was like, nothing matters. Everything's like a gray cardboard cutout. And so now I'm just invigorated by reality itself and by finding open-minded people like you, man. Expanded Mind podcast, that's the journey. We're all expanding our minds, and so coming alongside others, it's like fire that fuels the fire. If you take a coal out of the fireplace, it gets cold by itself and just dwindles off, but when you bring the fire together, there's that warmth that we described in the beginning. So you bring that, man. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too. And so when you got thrown into, so in your weed trips and you got thrown into, I would say a psychosis, what would you call it? A weed psychosis or psychosis? Like, what would you call it first off?
Yeah, so the first one, because it wore off in like an hour, that they could call that a drug-induced psychosis. I'm just going to use the psychological terminology, even though I don't believe it's a loss of contact with reality. And in some ways, I believe it's more in touch with reality. But I think it's handy to use what people are calling it, so we know we're talking about the same thing. So the first one would have been a drug-induced psychosis. That's not necessarily diagnosed as a mental health condition. But the second one, because the drugs had worn off and I hadn't touched anything for a month and a half, that would be clinical psychosis, which led to my bipolar 1 diagnosis.
Okay. And so when you're in that, and it's been a month or so, would you say, like, I think Carl Jung, you mentioned Carl Jung, and is that you going into the personal unconscious, and that's how you describe drowning in those waters of psychosis? You're just lost in the imagery and the symbology, and you just couldn't make your way out of it? Is that what happened?
Well, that's a good question, man. And it shows your understanding of depth psychology. But yeah, I do. And remember that below Carl Jung's personal unconscious is the collective unconscious, where we're all joined. We're kind of like islands in the sea, and we stick out above the surface. we can see each other at a distance and say, what up? And we can point to ships that are on the mutual consensus horizon. We can both see the water. But what we don't see is that beneath the water, there's the personal unconscious. And on the deepest level is the bedrock of Earth, where we're all connected. We're actually all the same organism. So yeah, I was definitely processing things from my personal unconscious, like things from my childhood. At one point, I thought I was an 8-year-old kid, like being led around by my mom. And I thought my buddies were people from my life. So there was that kind of dreamlike element to it. But there was also the collective unconscious and epigenetic unconscious knowledge. For instance, my dad lived in a community in Hawaii that is, I don't know if you've seen Madagascar, the movie, the animated one, like you go through the jungle. That song, dude, exactly when that song kicks in, it's like this jungle paradise, right? And they're just throwing this big party. Now, I had visions of that vibe, even though I'd never been to where my dad lived in Hawaii before that. He took his own life when I was 18 because of his untreated condition, which is sad. So obviously I've had a deep affinity of getting to know my dad's world and what it is. And I had that vision in my so-called psychosis. Then years later, I go to this place in Hawaii and it's exactly like my psychosis, down to like the same symbology, like the same words that people are using. So I was definitely tapping into something that's more than just my personal unconscious. You could say it has the epigenetic or legacy, a lineage, knowledge download, but I also believe that I'm tapped into, you could call it the etheric domain, or the place where all the knowledge is stored. And so I'm fascinated by Jung's deepest strata there of the collective unconscious, the Akashic record.
And does that explain the whole telepathic thing, and you being able to, at least you feeling like you communicate with dogs and stuff like that? Does that, the collective unconscious, you tapping into that, explain what was going on there?
I think it does. Yeah, I think so. And like, I don't know if the dog was thinking that stuff, bro, but this was coming from somewhere that I don't identify as myself. So when that other self gives me knowledge that's valid and like is verifiable, well, I feel like I'm talking to some sort of an other. It could be, I guess, in the depth psychology world, it's all just one thing, and we're drawing this information from the collective. But then in the spiritual models, if we look at the Hebrew, the biblical framework, you could see it as communicating with entities or spirits or demons or angels, getting these from sentient entities that kind of swim around in that water.
Yeah. So, and when you were in Fuller Seminary, I heard or you said that you wrote papers on this kind of stuff. Like, what were your papers about?
Oh, they were so out there, man. But they weren't that out there. Like it was based on the material that I was given. I was able to write about Carl Jung's collective unconscious in combination with things like non-duality of Advaita Vedanta Hinduism and delusions of reference in psychosis, where you believe that everything's talking to you. And never once did any of my professors shut me down, quite the opposite. And I got amazing grades. They kept on encouraging these kinds of ways of thinking. And so I was grounding it all in research and in references and that sort of thing. So I wrote one that described how delusions of reference, which is common in things like schizophrenia and bipolar, where you believe everything's talking to you, like you're picking up messages from the TV, the song is to you, it's telling you to do a certain thing. And that was 100% what happened to me, to the extent that like I was seeing messages to myself in the license plates. I was saying, well, yeah, that's because the inner world and the outer world are actually two sides of the same coin, which is Carl Jung's thinking. He teamed up with quantum physicist pioneer Wolfgang Pauli to come up with the theory of the unus mundus, which means one world, that mind and matter are actually the same thing. It's the same energy, just being interpreted in different ways by our mind. And so the line there on the screen separating us, that's just a useful construct, where you end and where I begin. And so that kind of a theory with Carl Jung can tie into the Hinduism idea of non-duality, which is Advaita Vedanta, which they say is one of the pinnacles of realization. Is you realize the Atman, you, the soul, is the same as Brahman, the external world, this whole created order. So that was one of the ones I did. I really liked my last one, which was on dimethyltryptamine, a psychedelic, and the after-death state, and something called apokatastasis, which is the end is the same place as the beginning, just kind of on a higher altitude. So saying that we basically come back to Eden. In fact, maybe we never even left Eden. And I was saying that dimethyltryptamine is a glimpse beyond time that shows us some of the connections of these things, but yet that's like being strapped to a rocket ship and being shown the view and then maybe crash down to the ground. Whereas we can actually attain these states of consciousness completely sober, and that way we get to control the rocket ship. And that's what the spiritual masters and the mystics were doing throughout time. And one more metaphor for that quickly, just to highlight some of the dangers, is that if we go up to the pinnacle of a mountain so that we get that view, but teleported there, or we're taken there with a mini rocket ship, suddenly if you drop there, you don't have the muscles that you would have built from climbing the mountain. You don't know the layout of the land. You don't know where the mountain lions tend to lurk. You're not able to fight those things off. So I believe that the spiritual realm is a real realm, and I think that psychedelics put us in touch with the real realm. But if we go there unprepared, I think that there can be dangers in that people, entities can take advantage of our ignorance and our naivety.
And that has to do with beware of unearned wisdom, right?
Hey, that's right, man. That was Carl Jung's quote when he was asked about psychedelics. He said, "Beware of unearned wisdom."
So when you were in weed, do you feel like some of the wisdom that you gained from those trips, would you say some of it was unearned wisdom, which led you to collapsing after? Do you think that's the reason why people collapse after their drug-induced psychosis or whatever psychosis they go through because of drugs?
Yeah, I do think that it was unearned wisdom, and I don't know whether I would have collapsed as quickly if I hadn't have gone to the hospital and I was put on heavy antipsychotic medication, and then I came off it too quickly, and that made me crash, man. Worst time of my life. Deep existential depression, clinical depression for 7 months. So I think my particular one was induced by messing up with the meds. But I do think that our natural serotonin levels and dopamine levels can't be sustained at that altitude for very long. It's like cortisol, the stress hormone. It's gonna burn us out. It can make us feel super sharp for a while, but eventually, if you're burning the candle at both ends, you're gonna burn your fingers. So I do think what goes up must come down, and people who gravitate at those heights unnaturally probably will find the yo-yo effect, and it brings them down.
And so if I like meditate and stuff and try to make my way there consciously to those heights, what kind of like model, or like what kind of spiritual models can I access to like get there? At least from your research, like what kind of methods have you found to like start to slowly navigate to those heights?
Well, I watched this one guy's video named Ezekiel, talks about the Jesus prayer. I'd love you to share a little bit about that, man, because I found that really inspiring, because I think what it is an ancient tried and tested tool used by the mystics to attain these levels of consciousness from a Christian tradition. You want to share a little bit about what that was like for you?
Yeah, so I found about the Jesus prayer from these guys over here. This Elder Paisios, he's a monk on, was it Mount Athos? And I started looking into orthodoxy and stuff. So I heard that they attained union with God through the Jesus prayer, which is basically the repetition of Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. And you just keep repeating it. And so at first, when I didn't jump into it right away. It became like gradual, like it slowly grew on me. So at first I started with the prayer, like nothing really happened. It was kind of like difficult to pray it. But then I started noticing how like when I would say it, just this feeling of light, this light feeling would surround me. And I would feel this bliss start to surround me. And then my heart would start to like open up. And it's like I started navigating, getting into these higher spiritual states because of it. And if you read some of their accounts and some of their experiences with it, they have somewhat similar experiences where they'll feel light fill into the room, and then they'll have an experience with Jesus, or with they call it the uncreated light. And so it's a very blissful and transcendent feeling. Some of the stages too involve, the pain of the heart. So you might feel like a sting in your heart, and it leads to like this. I think 2 nights ago, it was kind of crazy. I had a dream on it where I could feel like a little dot in my heart, like if I had a hole or something. but I could feel that dot in my heart came about because of the heat of that prayer. Like, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. I could feel it burning in my heart. I'm just a little dot of it though, but it produced pain inside of me. But it was there's different levels to it. I haven't fully navigated it all the way, but that's one way you can ascend into those spiritual heights. And also it brings about surrendering your mind. So if you're struggling with dark forces or mental health in general, learning how to concentrate your mind into the heart will help you regenerate and restore your mind back to more of a peaceful state. So that's what I've learned from it so far. I'm still a beginner with this, but that's one method, one way to navigate that spiritual heights.
So that's huge, man. Yeah, I love that. And yeah, I was really inspired by your video. And I say a version of that prayer every morning too. And it would make sense to me that that light would be a little seed planted in your heart. And like, that's how it works. And then that seed can grow and illuminate more and more and clean up more and more of the infections around there. And it can be a burning pain. Like, I'm sure that the purification process, being put in fires to purify gold, is not always a comfortable process. But I think you make a lot of sense about how we sometimes have to get out of our mind and think through the heart. Like in the biblical Hebrew worldview, the heart was the center of our will and our being, and some of the purest thought can come from the heart. And once we connect with that heart, that's where we can be a clearer filter, so that our mind isn't blocking everything out, and we can start to tap into some of the information that's always accessible to us, but that our conscious thoughts, the ones that are raised here in the West, can often tune out. And so that's where the halos and some of the pictures in the Orthodox tradition and in other traditions are, because the mind and the soul is so pure that this higher dimensional information can then come into the mind, and it's not blocked out and filtered by our preconceptions and the little heuristic shortcuts that we have to use. So I've actually been inspired to try that more. I'm going to try that because of you. But some of the other things that I've found are mysticism. It's basically learning the techniques of the mystics. And I've been really reading Evelyn Underhill's book, Practical Mysticism. And she says, very similar to what you're saying, that we've got to get a little bit out of our mind and into our heart and be very present in the moment, because reality is always trying to communicate with us. Reality with a capital R, God, is always trying to talk to us through the created order. But our minds are filtering it out because we're just on this kind of go track. And so I find presence, connecting with nature is huge. Learning to interpret things metaphorically, looking for the symbolism and things. In the Christian tradition, Jesus would talk about the spiritual domain through nature metaphors, the seeds, the birds. Like, how do you learn about the kingdom of God? Check out the plants. And then Buddha would do the same thing in the Buddhist tradition. And he went up on a mountain and he just held up a flower for his sermon. And so I think nature is always trying to communicate. The light's always trying to come through if we have eyes to see and ears to hear. And I think connecting with the heart and this larger wisdom that's trying to lead us is one of the pathways. And science is proving that too. There's this Heart Math Institute, and they did studies where they showed people like random images, and they had them hooked up. And the heart can pick up before a scary image comes on the screen, it will react. Like split seconds before it comes on the screen, the heart will react. So in some ways, the heart's able to transcend our linear time in the same kinds of ways that these mystical experiences and psychedelic experiences too can transcend linear time.
Speaking of nature, I heard you were hanging out with some South African Sangomas and you spent some time with them. Can you tell me about like your experience hanging out with that culture?
Yeah, I definitely, man. That's cool that you know that. So the Sangomas are the South African shamans, and they are called to Sangomahood by what we would call in the West psychosis. They would see visions, or they'd get even psychosomatic bodily like illnesses and pains. And they say that they have to heed the call, because if you ignore that call, like you would just get worse, and sometimes you can even die. And so I was in my family, we had a really close family friend we spent a lot of time with, who was the daughter of a Sangoma. And so she was able to talk me through a lot of how these traditions work. And for instance, the calling that her grandmother had to become a Sangoma, because it's normally passed through genetic lines, was that she had the stomach that illness that the doctors couldn't cure, until she had a deep dream one night, tapping into that personal and that collective unconscious, where she was inside the serpent of a snake, inside the belly. And the stranger who she'd never seen before came and gave her the key, which unlocked it, and she was able to get out of the belly of the serpent. Woke up the next day, and that very guy from her dream, who she'd never seen before, walked past her house. And she's like, oh, and so she chases this guy down. She ended up following the signs that were being led to her, and she did the initiation and became a Sangoma. And so when I was there, some of my good friends, some of my best friends growing up, were a part of the Khoisan Bushman tradition, and they had more of this enchanted animistic way of seeing reality. And so I learned a lot from them. And on one of my times, I went to like those Zulu huts, those round Zulu huts with the thatched roof, and I went to go see the actual Sangoma, somewhere that's probably like 13 hours drive from my hometown of Cape Town. And while I was there, I was with other Westerners too, but the Sangoma picked me out and said, you've got the gift. Come live with me and I'll teach you how to speak to the birds. And so I was enchanted. I was like, now should I do that? I happened to have a plane ticket to Singapore, so I decided, thanks, but no thanks. Ate the guy's spinach though. I had a bite of the guy's spinach, so who knows what that did. But it was really interesting because I hadn't been diagnosed bipolar, neurodiverse at that point, and yet he picked up on some sort of a frequency. And he was telling me that I can learn to talk to the birds. And in my so-called psychosis, one of the synchronicities was that I was led by this bird who would jump from branch to branch, and I would follow, then the bird would go to another branch. And a lot of the people that I work with as a peer support specialist believe they can get messages from different species of birds, and the birds are communicating. If we even think about Disney and how Snow White will go into the forest and the birds are all like kind of doing her tasks for her, I think that there is a way to communicate with nature. And so these kinds of traditions, although they're not pure in and of themselves, I'm not saying they've got it all figured out, they are onto the enchantment of nature in ways that in the West we've forgotten about.
Interesting. And then also another thing too, with the South African Sangomas I saw that you put out was they would have to blindfold people, and they would have to use their inner sight to find a certain object. Like they would like have to find an object with their eyes closed. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's right. So when they're called to become a Sangoma through the psychosis, it's not like, oh, okay, cool, you've had an episode of psychosis, you're one of us, because they're the leaders of the community. They go through what's called the Ukuthwasa training, where they're taken in by the elders of the community and they're trained, sometimes in gnarly ways, and they're pushed to the edge of themselves. They're taught their cosmology and how the world works. And then at the end, they'll have their graduation, the Ukuthwasa graduation, and they're brought before the community, and they've got to prove their abilities. So for instance, the community would have hidden something around, and they've got to, without hesitation, be able to go and find that thing that's been hidden. Or maybe someone stole the chickens. And it's like, all right, who stole the chickens? And then you got to know who stole the chickens. So I think that's a helpful point. There's a couple of helpful points in there. The one is that we need community and the wise elders to take us in and to teach us how to navigate these things, because I don't know. I didn't know anyone who was going to teach me how to navigate these states of consciousness when I was going through it. And so, of course, I made a mess out of it. And the second helpful thing is that we've got to test these abilities. We can't always just believe that because we've thought it's true. And I made that mistake a bunch of times and ended up getting me arrested and taken to the psychiatric hospital a bunch of times. So by making those mistakes, by falling forward, I've learned that it is important to test these abilities, and it is important to find a community who can wrap around you and be those mirrors. Like in South Africa, we have an expression called Ubuntu, which means I am who I am through other people. The only way that I even know who I am, we're socially constructed individuals, is because other people are like mirrors that we bounce our idea of ourselves off until we formulate this conception. So it's very important who the mirrors are and what they're telling us about ourselves. And so I think we've lost a little bit of the community here. I was just with the pace of life in America, which I think maybe with COVID, we're going to start to recover a little bit. I feel like the tectonic plates have shifted and we could see a reemergence of a new way of being in the world. But yeah, I think Africa's got a few things to teach us, as of course the West has things to teach Africa too.
Wait, so you're saying that Western society is out of sync with nature and with each other? Or what are you inferring by saying that?
I would say more so than, yeah, some of the traditional cultures. I think that I literally, well, I guess I do know my neighbor on that side. I don't know those neighbors. I don't know who they are. And like people who live around the block, I think we're just so busy that we don't have that depth of connection because we have to
Okay.
hustle,
Yeah.
man. Like things are expensive, right? And so we're constantly on the go. Whereas in those kinds of cultures, they have more time and they know who their neighbors are because they actually have to depend on each other. There isn't, in a way, the government support that we have here. And yeah, I do think also our reliance on technology and the ability to spend so much of our time working has disconnected us from nature. And you know, you get all these visions of the future, these movies that are all apocalyptic and everything's going to be machines and dark gray. I don't think so. I think the future is going to be a reintegration with nature and using technology to be able to tap into what we lost before, but in an enhanced and vibrant kind of way.
Okay. And I remember too, like, this kind of going into mental health now, like, I was having some of those delusions where I thought I had certain abilities and stuff like that. And I wanted to, I mean, to be straight, like I did perform some of these abilities and sometimes it didn't happen. I mean, I had the gift of healing, you could say. Like I'd go out and I remember one of the uh one of the most profound miracles that I saw happen in front of me that I did was there was this lady, this homeless lady that would be at the end of the what is it, of an island. And I would always talk to her. Like she was a very nice lady, actually. She was pretty much in her right mind, I would say. It's just that life kind of dealt her a bad hand and she ended up being in that low spot. But I'd always talk to her, and then she had like an overthrown shoulder like this, and she was all messed up. And so I decided I wanted to pray for her, and then I was just praying over her in that moment when she was on the island. And then next thing you know, I hear this boom, and her shoulder goes right back into place. And she looks at me, she's like, "Oh my God." And I was also like, when I was praying though, I felt myself shift into some kind of, I don't even know what it was. I just felt some kind of shift when I was praying. And then that's when that click into place happened.
Oh,
But there's also times where I thought I can do it. I went out to go pray for someone and I completely embarrassed myself thinking, being overconfident with that I can do that again or something. So I don't necessarily know how that works, but having that community, like you said, is very important because I didn't necessarily know how to foster that gift or learn how to develop it. So I've been pretty much alone in thinking that I can do some things, you could say. Um, but how do you begin to develop the, let's say, first off, the community around you? Like how do you find community and to help foster your growth? And two, like what's kind of the consequences of not being able to find a community to help nourish your gifts, and kind of help you sort out through those very grandiose thoughts and things like that?
yeah, totally. Well, that's really cool that you were able to help her like that. That's amazing, man. And it happened when you felt the power as well. I think that is a version of a miracle. And we saw even Jesus couldn't do miracles sometimes. Like, I don't know exactly how the dynamic works. Maybe it depends on the faith of the person as well. Because I know in Jesus' hometown, he couldn't do miracles because they're like, no, wait, dude, I grew up with you. You can't heal. And then he couldn't heal. So I think that we bring a part to the equation and we're an ecosystem too. And it's not all about our performance. And I don't think that we should feel like the ability to do miracles or not do miracles is about us or our performance or how good we are or whatever, because it's always God who does the miracle, and his wisdom is obviously bigger than ours. But I think it's really cool that you try stuff like that. And I think it's cool that you put yourself out there. I think it's cool that you got this YouTube channel. That's what happened with me, is just I started to, it's like, all right, because I would go around and like I would tell these stories in certain contexts within the San Diego mental health scene, and I could see everyone light up, like everyone lit up and everyone would want to share. And then they would just go back to being normal, or there would be people who you could see that they would want to share, but they would not because maybe there was a psychologist in the room, or we would be at work.
Share about what?
About these paranormal noetic experiences, these experiences that you're talking about, these like altered states of consciousness, these views of reality that don't align with the mainstream. It's like these things are far more common than we think. In Nepal, up to 45% of people have had what in the West we would call a psychosis. Here in America, it's up to 20% of people, but often they're not diagnosed with anything because they just don't tell anyone. But these noetic experiences, these experiences of miracles and deja vu and experiences that blow our current space-time model out the water, they happen like every day, dude. And I think they pretty much happen to everyone, but people don't want to be seen as crazy. And so I found that in the work field, like I knew personally that these people had been through it, but they would be very cautious about bringing this up in kind of a job environment, and within the support communities and the support groups and stuff. People would want to share, but they would also be worried about what other people think. And so I was like, okay, I know you guys, and I know that this is super common. I'm just going to come out with it. And I started becoming really public about it, making the videos, talking to people about it, creating my own little platforms and my own little programs and things. And that way I'm being the change that I want to see in the world. It's like, why is everyone hiding behind these masks? I think one of the best ways to find community is to be yourself, because what's the alternative? We could do this really nicely designed mask and wear that thing all around, but then people are liking you for the mask, and then you don't feel validated as a person anyway. And you've got to constantly be upgrading the mask so that it compares to the latest version. So I think one of the best ways to find community is by being authentic. Obviously, there's safe spaces and unsafe spaces. You don't go telling everyone everything, but a few trusted people, if you can start to share that and you could start to create that circle, it tends to multiply exponentially. Because if you are one buddy who kind of gets it, likely that buddy's got a buddy. Now you got 3 buddies, and that buddy, and we'll start to see that actually the world is much more enchanted, and there's possibilities that the reductionist materialist model is not right about. They really aren't. So the consequences of not finding those communities are that you could go one of 2 ways. Either you think you're the special one and you've got to figure it all out yourself, and you end up making solipsistic errors. I mean, we are mirrors, right? We need each other to balance the truth. So you can go down this path of thinking you've got it all figured out, where likely you're probably missing some of your blind spots. The other way that it can go, though, is you think that you're broken and you think, oh, I'm some freak of nature, like what on earth? And then you go into your little cocoon and you hide yourself. And that light that's trying to glow from within you is hidden under the bushel, hidden under the bowl. And we separate from other people, and like the coal gets cold and dark. That can happen. And I've experienced both of those 2 different dynamics. So yeah, I think it's important to, I mean, we got the internet, man. We can find a lot of people who can complement our views. It's not only about finding people who agree with us, but people who can constructively disagree as well. I think that's how we're going to piece together the mosaic in the best way. What do you think? How easy has it been for you to find community?
To be honest, not that easy, because I'm one of those people that I'll isolate myself. And to be honest, I don't necessarily see a problem with doing that. Just because I feel like it's kind of like just me protecting myself. Because there's a lot of thoughts that go in my head that are pretty out there, I would say. But one thing that I've kind of done to ground myself in all of that is one of the spiritual practices I've also picked up. It's from a book called Blueprints to Union. And one of the things that he'll mention is that to view all your thoughts and your emotions as, he uses the analogy of Santa. So like the idea of Santa is a false image, or false, it's a, what do you call it? It's a whole story and everything, but it's based off of though like an illusion. And what do you call it? Since it's based off of like an illusion, and like you emotionally give yourself to that, like, oh my God, Santa's coming. Like you have that excitement. It's still an illusion. Like it doesn't change the fact that Santa's actually not coming to your house. Like it's an illusion. So I started viewing as, even though I have those major thoughts and kind of like, oh my God, like I'm getting these downloads, stuff like that, I started viewing them as just like, I started undoing them, unraveling them, and started entering into a space where I'm completely silent in myself. And that takes practice. There's some thoughts that I react to that I get so like excited about, but I've learned how to slowly start to just undo and unravel a lot of, you know, my thought process around things. So, and it says there's nothing really to share with people, to be honest, other than just the silence that is within, that I find within myself. But if I want to come out and share stuff like what I'm doing on my YouTube channel, like I feel like I feel very comfortable doing that. But also there is still a hidden element of depression within myself. I'm not gonna deny that I still am scared sometimes to open up and be vulnerable and allow people to judge me around some delusions or thoughts that I hold on to in the deep recesses of my mind. But that's how I've dealt and coped with being by myself a lot. So
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that authenticity, that yeah, depression can still be there. And it's this thing is like, are they gonna accept me if I say these things? Like, how open-minded is the world? Are there any people in my life who can understand this kind of stuff? So I can relate a lot to all of that. And I think that how you shared about being discerning about that, and creating a bit of a gap between yourself and your thoughts, I think that can be helpful. And there's seasons for everything as well. Like, I don't know how recently it was that you went through some of your stuff, but I know that I had to process things and digest for a while before I just literally stuck all my stuff on YouTube and told everyone everything I think. So I think that just like a plant grows in stages and in seasons, when we've broken the shell, when something's happened that's kind of shattered our world, there can be times where we just need to be nourished by light and water and get the elements. And it sounds like that light's dawning in your heart. I think it's really interesting what you said about Santa, because I've been talking about that with my wife for the last couple of years. It seems to me that we're almost set up to throw out the baby with the bathwater, in that Santa is supposed to be like God, and we're set up to believe in this illusion. He's good. He's this magical being who gives you gifts, and he wants you to be good and not naughty, and he's got elves and things. And so we set up the straw man fallacy about God. And then when we discover that Santa's not real, poof, we throw out the baby with the bathwater and say, well, then God's not real. What? He's not some Santa sitting up in the sky. Like, Santa's literally up in the North Pole as well. So I think that our culture can be deceptive, and there can be things that plant the seeds of doubt within us. And I think we question everything. Well, any belief in magic must not be right. Even though 99.9% of humanity that's ever existed believed that there was the spiritual realm and that these deep religious experiences are possible. So I think that there's probably many more people who've gone through very similar things to what you've gone through than we could possibly imagine at the time. But I think there's also health in taking your time in coming out with it and finding a couple of trusted people to bounce these things off before just coming out and being completely public about it.
yeah, and I can tell, like, when I share with people whether it sticks with them or not. Like,
Yeah.
you get the chills and stuff, like when you share with somebody and it really hits them deep down, or you can feel they're being just shift.
Yeah.
So I've learned how to be more discerning too with who I tell, because I almost feel this might be a little bit cocky, but like I can almost feel like as soon as I see somebody, I know whether or not they're gonna get it or not, like without even talking
Yeah.
to them.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like something that I have in the back of my mind, what I think. But I still keep an open mind though. I give people the benefit of the doubt to, even though like I might think that, it's just like I still have open arms to the fact that they could be receptive to things that I have to say and stuff like that. But how did you start to remove the stigma? So the stigma behind like your bipolar 1, and because personally, like I was diagnosed major depressive disorder and bipolar 2, and during that whole season though, I'm gonna try to summarize it. Part of me did actually want to get diagnosed that because of my self-destructive tendencies. um yeah, part of me did want to get labeled like that, but also I was still trying to figure out like, why am I so like depressed and why am I going through all these things? I couldn't really make out whether I was actually mentally ill or whether I was well, there's something wrong with me. And my psychiatrist was telling me, hey, we got to get you back to normal. And I'm thinking in my head, like, what the hell is normal? I don't know what you're trying to get me to. And I was on meds. And as soon as I was given this whole story of like, okay, you know, I have you on meds. And by the way, I don't want to promote quitting drugs and your meds and stuff. it was just at the time, that's my reaction to all the stuff where I just threw it out. I was like, I don't want to deal with this. But he gave me, I was on meds and stuff, antidepressants and antipsychotics for what I was going through at that time. And when I was told like, oh, you're just gonna have to learn how to cope, and you're gonna have to learn how to manage your emotions, stuff like that, and these meds will help you, your emotions kind of get mellowed out and stuff. I started to feel like I was just thrown into a box and just, okay, this is the rest of my life. I'm just gonna be hopeless. And I was somewhat okay with that, but also part of me was just like what the hell? Like I was expecting for my life to change going to therapy. I was expecting all these big things, and I was just put into a box. And so, long story short, I quit my meds. I quit them cold turkey. But luckily for me, I didn't have a terrible reaction quitting, going off of them. I did get launched into a psychosis though, that I was able to deal with because I took it seriously. I decided that, I was going to meditate every single day. I was going to take care of my mental health and not participate in things that wasn't good for me. And eventually I felt myself purging of all these wasted emotions or mixed emotions that I was going through at the time. And so, but I wouldn't necessarily consider myself fully healed, but I felt very hopeless being in that mode of existence, going to therapy, getting put on drugs. And so how did you remove the stigma off of yourself and start to find healing past what you were going through?
Yeah, thanks, man. And I appreciate you being real about all that kind of stuff. And it is a journey. I think that you touch on a lot of important things there, is that it's handy to have a diagnosis in a way, because then it's like, all right, look, other people go through similar kinds of things. So what are the types of things that help these people? And we can get the tools of the psychiatrist and the therapist and all of that. Here's the thing though, is that it's still an enigma. It's still a mystery. Even the best of the best, the psychiatrists and the therapists, have not plumbed the eternal depths of the human mind. They don't exactly know. They found some things that can help, but they also can't fix everything. I think we're taught with the reductionist materialist model that it's just like, if you cut yourself, you put on this cream and then it will fix it, and then the mind will be well, and then you can play sport again. Now, the human psyche is far more complex than that. And so, I mean, I'd be interested to hear from you. What are the things that brought that spark back? I could share some of the things that did for me, but when you did go through those depressive seasons, when you do go through them, what are the types of things that get you out of it?
I'll get emotional about it. I don't even know.
My bad.
Uh,
Much love, dude. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know what got me out of it, other than I could say God, but I don't necessarily I would say my belief in God and being courageous enough to face the unknown. I mean, I knew that what I was going through was a lot, and I don't have an answer for you, to be honest, what kept me going, but I decided if I was going to keep living, like, I might as well find the help and, make my life better than it was yesterday. So, I mean, I don't necessarily have a big answer for you. For some unconscious reason, I decided to keep going despite all that. So,
Yes, bro. I dropped your heart on the screen there. Man, I just so appreciate that vulnerability, and it's not easy. And you're really strong, dude, just like your name means, God's strength. And I guess it was God's strength that got you through. And okay, I'm going to keep going one step at a time. And I think that's kind of all we have the choice to do. Like in Frozen 2, the movie Frozen 2, I got two little daughters, 9 and 5, so we watched Frozen 2 a bunch of times. And Anna, the main character, gets stuck in this cave of depression where all the magic evaporates from her life. The little snowman Olaf guy just evaporates from her life, and she's there crying in the cave. And the song that comes on is "Just Do the Next Right Thing." Just do the next right thing. And she looks up and she's a little pinprick of light, and she takes one step towards it. The pinprick gets bigger and bigger, and she's moving towards the light. Suddenly the path is illuminated in front of her, and she emerges from the cave and becomes the heroine. She goes back to her hometown and ends up rescuing things. So we really can't see the whole staircase, but just taking those steps will allow the ascension to happen, man. And you're so strong for having the courage to do that, because it's courage. And it's really, depression was the worst time of my life, as I shared. And so it's no light thing, and it's not something that people can just pull themselves up by their bootstraps either. Like, I'm pretty good at talking myself into things, but I couldn't talk myself out of depression. And so if you look at brain scanned images of like people's brains when they're depressed and when they're not depressed, the depressed brain is so much more shut down. So there's a legit like phenomenon going on there. So for me, what got me out of the depression was something very similar to what you're talking about, is the inspiration of God, that no, there's meaning and beauty in these ashes. And I can create a mess out of this mess that I've made. I can bring a message, and there's new life that comes out of it. So it's like, even Jesus says the seed has to die for the plant to spring up. And so having that perspective of hope that there's a work happening within me, that's really what started to broaden that light, broaden those horizons. I was going to rearrange my life so that it was conducive towards me thriving and me doing things that brought me that joy. I think we have an intuitive sense about the kinds of things that light us up. If we don't, I think it's worth like watching yourself for a couple of days. When were the times that you were most stoked, when you had that fire? Like, do more of that. Because I do believe that we've got a call on our lives, and we've got this plan that we can step into where it's not even us having to do it. This thing will just unfold by itself. So for me, it was tapping into alternative understandings than the broken brain model that really helped me to reframe my diagnosis. And I found that in like Sean Blackwell's Bipolar or Waking Up YouTube channel. And yeah, dude, you had Sean on your channel. That's awesome, man. He's a
Shout
big
out to
deal.
Sean.
What up, Sean?
What's
Yeah,
up,
he's really
Sean?
cool. He's really cool. So him, dude, he was the first one that showed me that other people have had these experiences that I've had. And so if that's the case, that's not our brain just malfunctioning, then it would be like static. So that kind of a paradigm, then it led me to explore more. And I looked at like the psychologists like Jordan Peterson and Carl Jung. And I looked at spiritual models like Christian mysticism, Advaita Vedanta Hinduism, and things like in science, panpsychism, biocentrism, and in philosophy, idealism, postmodernism, and these kinds of things that broaden our horizons until we see, oh, wait, actually, this magic, this splendor, this vitality was here all along. And I think there's a biological component. For sure, for me, the antidepressants helped me at that time give me this energy. And then once you've got the energy, you can use that energy for constructive things so that you can then build a safety net and then taper yourself off the medication. Some people can. I did it even with the guidance of my psychiatrist. And I too had a so-called psychotic episode the day that I came off my meds. So these are risks, but I do think that it's possible. It's a combination of the biological, psychological, social, and spiritual. We're biopsychosocial spiritual beings, and enhancing and enriching and feeding all of those little bits at a time is what led to a metamorphosis. And it's still undergoing, and I haven't got it all figured out, but I've seen it time and time again in the lives that I get to know, and in now the people that I look up to and stuff. So we know that it's possible, which is, it brings real hope into situations where it can seem really dark.
So yeah, I mean, personally, when I was also going through that too, it was like I couldn't even get out of bed. That was how it was for me in a sense. But again, like I think meditating and all this kind of stuff helped me to kind of rise above what I was going through, because when I was going through my spiritual emergency, the stuff I was going through when I quit my meds, by the way, was completely, I would say, I mean, mystical, but it would be pretty, it's mystical, but it's also like life-threatening at the same time, because I was starting to be sensitive to energy, which would send me into having panic attacks where I would just literally feel like I'm losing my mind. I would be in my bed thinking like I need to be in a mental hospital right now. But when I was able to like observe my thoughts and just completely just let go and surrender myself completely into the unknown, it was just like I started to make my way through that and started to, you know, let go of all that kind of stuff and that baggage. which, I mean, this is why I'm still here today. I decided to continue to, let go of those things and be here for the people around me and things like that. So, yeah, that's how I mainly got through that stuff. But yeah, this mental health's no joke, and it's, but I think that when people though like glorify it and say, oh, I'm depressed and I'm anxious and try to like tell people, I mean, I understand that people have a cry for help too, but I think that um we have to learn to like set up people to where instead of complaining about it, we can begin to face it and deal with these things. Because I was one of those people too. Like I would go to women and vent about my problems and things like that. Um, and the sad thing though is that they would be repulsed by it, and that would put me into a further state of not feeling like I'm good enough. Um, and so I think what you're doing too is you're helping set up people to face that and go into that hero's journey so they can be the hero of their own story. And so I appreciate your work and stuff. Like it's a lot of stuff I think in that direction too, like the way that you presented neurodiversity and stuff. I think a lot about in that. I think about mental health in that way too. So thank you.
Thank you, man. I've said behind the scenes that I really think you've got a purpose in your life, and I think you're doing something really special here, man. And I feel like something's blossoming through you that is unique. I haven't seen much of it at all, these angles that you're taking on the topics. I've watched a few of your videos, and you've got a special flavor to bring to the world. And so the mental health is no joke. No, it's really gnarly. I think it's really wise what you say. It's like building a bit of a gap between you and your thoughts. Like then we can just watch the storm happen, but we're not the storm. We can let the storm, we can even watch the storm with interest. It's like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
But when we're sucked into the storm, we're blown about. We can't maintain that composure. But being rooted in something that transcends the storm, whether it's a spiritual reality, whether it's your family or community, something that is the eye of the storm, then you can watch the whole thing spin around you. And it can actually provide insight, like what are these anxious thoughts? Where are they coming from? What is this depression? Is there something I should change about my life? If I could design my life in any possible way, what it would look like? They use that in psychology as the magic pill question. And I think that's helpful. It's like, well, what you want is a reflection of who you are. And so discovering who we are more, I mean, I wasn't taught much in my education system at all, like who I am, like anything about mental health, about meaning and purpose, creativity, social connection. I think really we've been doing a bit of a disservice to the kids. And now it's our turn to revise things. Now I've got my kids, like how are we going to redesign society so that it feeds into the things that matter? I've literally used calculus 0 times, but yet I use mental health every day. I live in a mind. And so I think that, of course, we're struggling with these things because we haven't been taught, but there is education out there. There's power, there's deep wisdom, and there's some psychologists who can really help. There's some medications that can really help. And there's communities that can come alongside us and wrap around us and fill in all of our blind spots so that this larger picture emerges of who we are, our identity is. And because it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we think we're broken and we're no good, we don't take any chances, and then nothing good comes out of our life. Now it's confirmation that we're broken and no good. But it works the other way too. If we feel, okay, no, maybe I have something that I can offer the world. Maybe I do have one of Gardner's multiple intelligences. Then we try that thing. Then we get better at that thing. Now we get recognition for that thing, and that turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy too. So I think the mind is really powerful, and we can co-create our futures, and we can align our future with this larger future that's pulling us all in. In seminary, they taught me a model called prolepsis, that it's not the past that's creating the present, not like Newton's billiard balls. That's not what led us up to today. It's the future that's pulling the present into itself. And it's happening at a faster and faster rate, kind of like those coin things where you drop it and it goes. The future is pulling the present into this glorious destiny. That's the good news, is the gospel is the future broke into the present to show us what we're all becoming. And the more that we can align with that trajectory, the more that it takes on a vitality and a life of its own, so that it's not up to us to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. So thanks for appreciating the stuff I'm doing. I appreciate the stuff you're doing. I really think that we could collaborate on big things in the future. You're right up the road, dude. That's cool. And LA is so influential, and San Diego's paradise. And so I feel like there's adventures for the two of us in the future.
Yeah, for sure. And one more point. You said the eye of the storm, learn how to be the eye of the storm. That's what that circle around his head is right here. That's what that is.
Really?
That's what I discovered. Meditating and going through all of that inner turmoil is that I learned how to, focus on that deep part in your mind that is just connected to spirit, if you will. And that observes and sees everything, because God is omniscient, omnipresent, and all-knowing. And so when you connect to that deep inside of, where I've learned it, they've said it's deep inside of your headspace, and I've meditated and I've seen that happen, that glow. There it is. That glow around your head. It's a
reflection of you. It's a picture of you.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's honestly what's probably been pulling me and guiding me through, is just that the spirit. So yeah. So
yeah, the unmoved mover, that quiet eye of the storm that's in us. In theology, God could be seen as the unmoved mover. He's the still in the storm, like Jesus is asleep in our boats, in the boat of our soul. And when he wakes up, he can make the outer world reflect the inner world too, and just say quiet waves. But there's a point in that. The point why he got to quiet the waves was to show the people around him that the elements obey him, and that even the storms, these tumultuous things, have a lesson to teach us. And we can walk on them. We can walk just like Peter did, when we're believing that we can walk on them. And as soon as we pay attention to the storm, we start to sink. But when we pay attention to the unmoved mover, that peaceful, still thing that transcends space and time within us, we have a perspective on the storm that can be even, wow, this is quite the storm. It's like in South Africa, in Cape Town, the wind is so strong that you can like literally lean up against the wind and it'll hold you up. And so like when I lived there, I hated it. I was like, it's always messing up the waves, bro. But now that I go back, I'm like, wow, these are real elements. We don't get elements in California. I'm like, look at this storm. Look at this storm. And I wonder if connecting with that eye of the storm, that little pinprick of light within our heart, can be the thing that allows us to view the storm with a bit of objectivity and maybe even learn or appreciate something from the storm. So like all of that came from what you shared with the Jesus prayer. So I really think that God's working in your life. I really see him shine through your eyes from time to time, man. So appreciate you, and I appreciate the halo thing. And like now I'm going to think about that, and I want to check out the picture behind you. I'm going to try to Google that thing as well.
Yeah. All right. My last and final question is going to be, where can people find you?
You can find me right here, right here, right now, right here.
Don't leak your address.
Right now. Okay, here's my address and my zip code and my personal phone. I appreciate that, man. Thank you. So people can find me at inspiredmindmentalhealth.com. The same web address, it's a redirect, is southafricanjosh.com. And so I'm doing some things that I get excited about, like even just starting a company, man. Like it can seem like, oh, it's not going to make that much of a difference, but it really has made me excited about my career and the possibilities. And so, yeah, you have to get organized and cross your T's and dot your I's. So there's a discipline involved, but there's a creativity and a vitality that can come through it. And so I'm really excited about some of the projects that I've got on the horizon, about the way that the mental health scene is changing, about the ways and types of conversations that people are starting to have about the alignment of spirituality and mysticism and mental health and the ecological perspective on the mind. So I think it's a cool time to be alive, a confusing time to be alive, but I'm glad we're all in it together. And I think it's going to get better and better and better and better.
Yes, it will. And so thank you, Josh, for coming on. Be sure to check him out. I'll leave everything in the description. And peace.
Man, Ezekiel. Peace, bro. Peace.
Peace.